When you're about to make a big financial decision. You do research, you read articles, you watch videos, you compare options obsessively, you run the numbers 100 times. You're trying to optimize, trying to get it right, because you know this choice is going to significantly affect your life. And for a lot of us, that's picking the right stock or index fund. We're checking earnings reports, analyzing data, thinking about our risk tolerance. We're meticulous. We spend hours on it. But then, and I think this is genuinely wild, a lot of those same people make another decision that's actually way more consequential than any of that, and they barely pause to think about it. My name's Synth, and I spend way too much time thinking about money and why we've somehow trained ourselves to be extremely careful about certain financial choices while being almost completely reckless about others that will affect us infinitely more. The decision I'm talking about is marriage. And I'm not saying don't get married. I'm saying that if you're going to spend hours analyzing a stock pick, you absolutely need to spend at least that much time, honestly, way more than that, thinking about marriage. Because the financial implications of that one decision dwarf pretty much everything else you'll ever do with money. And that's what we're exploring today. Not whether marriage is good or bad, just the reality of what it actually costs, what it actually means for your finances, and why we've somehow decided to treat it more casually than choosing a brokerage app. Let's start with the raw numbers, because they're kind of staggering. The average wedding in the United States costs around $33,000. In major cities, with traditional family expectations, if people are trying to do something nice, you could easily hit $50,000, $60,000, $70,000. I know people who spent more on a wedding than they spent on their first car. But here's the thing, that's just one day, one very expensive day. The actual financial impact of marriage extends way beyond that single afternoon. Once you're married, you're making a legal contract that affects absolutely everything. Your taxes change, your filing status changes. You're now jointly liable for certain debts. If your spouse has student loans or made bad financial decisions, that's now your problem in ways it wasn't before. Let me put this in perspective. If you invest $100,000 in stocks and lose it all, you lose $100,000. It sucks, but it's contained. Your losses are capped. But if you commit $100,000 through marriage, shared housing, shared finances, shared responsibility, and that marriage ends, you're splitting that $100,000, paying legal fees that could be $20,000 or $30,000, potentially dealing with alimony. The financial hit can be devastating, 6 figures, decades of impact. And that's if things go badly. Even when things go well, there are significant costs. You're now combining your financial lives, joint credit cards, joint accounts, joint decisions about every major financial move. The point is, the wedding itself is expensive, but the financial decision of marriage is arguably the biggest one most people will ever make, and we treat it like we're just going with the flow.
Here's something that doesn't show up in the wedding budget, but absolutely affects your finances. Once you get married, your expenses get locked in at a certain level, and it becomes really hard to reduce them. I know this couple, Sarah and Mark. Before they got married, they were living in a modest apartment, both making decent salaries. They were saving, they were doing fine. Then they got married and decided to buy a house. $400,000. Reasonable house, reasonable neighborhood. Except here's what happened. Once they bought the house, they were locked in. Mortgage, property taxes, maintenance. And because they had the house, they felt like they needed to furnish it, keep it nice, stay in a good school district. They were locked into this entire lifestyle. Now, individually, either one could have downsized. You can make that choice alone. But once you're married with kids, it becomes exponentially harder. It's not just your decision anymore. You're locked in with another person who has their own preferences, their own comfort level, their own dreams about what your life should look like. And here's the psychological part. Once you're locked in together, you match each other's spending. If one person wants to upgrade their car, the other starts thinking about upgrading theirs. If one person wants to travel more, suddenly you're both traveling more. You're pulled toward higher baseline spending, not lower. You're compromising upward toward whoever has higher spending preferences. A single person just optimizes for their own values. If they want to save 60% of income, they do it. No compromise. No one pulling them toward higher spending, just alignment between their values and behavior. Once you're married, that's split between two people. You've got to negotiate. You've got to compromise. Usually, that means spending more than one person wants to spend and saving less than the other wants to save. Let me be direct. The divorce rate is around 50%. That means there's roughly a 50-50 chance your marriage ends in divorce. That's not pessimism, that's math. And when it happens, the financial consequences are severe. Lawyers are expensive, you're splitting assets, splitting debt, splitting your 401k, splitting your house equity. Everything you've built together gets divided. I knew someone, Tom, who'd been married for 12 years, made decent money, had built a solid financial picture over those years. Then the marriage ended, and I watched his net worth get cut in half. Half! Plus, he had to pay alimony for several years. The financial setback was absolutely brutal. It took him years to recover. Here's what gets me. He spent way more time researching his investment portfolio than he spent thinking about whether he and his wife were actually compatible on a financial level. He optimized his 401k allocation, he read articles about stocks, and he spent maybe 20 minutes thinking about whether this marriage made sense. That's the norm. We're meticulous about picking stocks and casual about the biggest financial decision of our lives. The math is simple. If there's a 50% chance of divorce, and divorce costs hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees and split assets, then the expected financial value of marriage is much, much lower than people think. You're potentially looking at a negative expected financial return just based on the divorce risk alone.
Marriage costs you time and attention in ways that compound over decades. You're committing years of emotional energy to another person. Years where you're not building a business, not taking career risks, not relocating for opportunities, not pursuing solo projects that might have become something significant. A single person with the same salary and opportunities but fewer constraints? Over 50 years, the financial difference could be absolutely massive because time is compounding. Every year you have fewer constraints, you can take more risks, you can optimize more aggressively. You can say yes to opportunities without checking with someone else first. In finance, we call this optionality value. The more options you have, the better off you are. Marriage is trading your optionality for commitment. Maybe that's worth it, but there is a real financial cost to giving it up. You're giving up the freedom to make certain decisions. You're giving up the ability to pivot quickly when opportunities arise. Marriage smooths out your trajectory. It makes your path more conservative because you're accounting for another person's preferences and risk tolerance. And that's not necessarily bad. It just has a real financial cost. Even if you love someone, even if you're compatible in almost every way, you might not be financially compatible. And that mismatch is expensive. Some people are savers. Some are spenders. Some want to travel constantly. Some want stability and a solid routine. Some want to take financial risks and invest aggressively, and others want to play it safe. The frustrating part, these preferences are really hard to change. Money is tied to deep psychological stuff, your childhood, your sense of security, your identity. So what happens? You spend years arguing about money. The saver is frustrated their spouse is spending too much. The spender is frustrated they're being too tight and not enjoying life. You're making financial compromises that suit neither of you perfectly. A single person just optimizes for their own values. If they want to save 60% of income, they do it. If they want to spend freely, they do it. There's no conflict. There's just alignment between their values and their behavior. If marriage is this massive financial commitment with enormous risks and opportunity costs, why do we treat it like it's not a financial decision at all? We've compartmentalized it. Marriage is in the relationship box. Money is in the finances box. We ask friends, do I love them? Are we compatible? We don't ask, are we financially compatible? That feels unromantic. That feels calculating. But marriage is both a relationship decision and a financial decision. If you optimize for one and ignore the other, you're making a mistake. You spend hours analyzing stocks because they're investment decisions, but marriage deserves the same analysis. You should ask, can we afford to be married? Are we financially compatible? What happens if we divorce? What am I giving up? Is the risk worth it? These questions feel cold, but they're necessary. I've talked about what you're giving up financially by getting married, but I'm not saying marriage is a bad financial decision. What I'm saying is, make it consciously. Know what you're doing. Understand the costs and risks, then decide if it's worth it to you. Because for some people, it absolutely is. If you find someone who's financially aligned with you, who wants the same things, who you trust completely, then the value you get from that partnership can easily outweigh the financial costs. The partnership in facing challenges, having someone in your corner, that emotional and relational value is significant. That's worth something. But you have to be intentional about it. You have to pick carefully. You have to have uncomfortable conversations about money before you commit. You have to assess financial compatibility the way you'd assess investment compatibility. And if you find you're not aligned, or the risks seem too high, or you want to maintain your independence and optionality, that's completely valid too. It doesn't make you unromantic. It makes you realistic about what you need and what you're willing to trade. The point is, don't let marriage happen to you. Don't drift into it because it feels like the next step or because you're at the age where you're supposed to. These are massive financial decisions that will affect the trajectory of your entire life. Treat them that way. Spend the time, do the analysis, have the conversations, and then make a choice that you've actually thought through. Your marriage will affect your finances more than your stocks ever will. It will affect your taxes, expenses, earning potential, assets, debt, risk profile, basically everything. And it will do that for decades. So maybe it's worth spending at least as much time thinking about marriage as you do thinking about your brokerage fees. Whatever you decide, just decide consciously. That's all I'm asking.